you keep muted until you're going to be allowed to ask questions at the time of questioning. We're also going to ask you to place your questions and comments in the chat as we proceed. All right, we have a competent set of persons here who will compile these questions, and we'll be tabling as many of these questions as will be possible. We're also going to ask for you to use the functionality of raising your hand during the question and answer segment. And when you acknowledge, we just ask that you voice some of these questions. Some of these questions, of course, we're also going to be voicing for you. Now, this afternoon, as I indicated, we have a tremendous knowledge base. I'm now speaking with regard to the panelists, all right? But I suspect you want to know who happens to be the moderator. I am Lawrence Nicholson. Some of you in the space, you call me Dr. Nicholson, but I was registered Lawrence Nicholson, so whatever you call me, I will answer. I am a senior lecturer in the Mono School of Business and Management here at UA. My area is managerial statistics, quantitative measures and operations management. And part of my research over the years would have touched on some aspects of logistics and supply chain management. At present, my focus is on family-owned and women-owned businesses, especially as it relates to the Caribbean and Jamaica in particular. And I will be the moderator, or that means that I will just allow the flow to go as per the logistics, no pun on it, and as we manage the value chain. So among the panelists, this afternoon, include that we're going to be now reading through, introducing each of the three panelists, and then after which I will now ask them to share in the area of their expertise. So we have Mrs. Diane Robinson, and she joined Grace Kennedy Limited in April 1990 as a project engineer in manufacturing administration. She was so dynamic that by February 1991, she became plant engineer at National Processors Limited. She subsequently became operations manager while the company repositioned itself from personal care products to focus on food processing, a position held until October 2003, when she assumed the role of general manager of National Processors Limited. Now, if you know anything about Grace Kennedy, she has to be a woman of substance to have moved through to that extent. Mrs. Robinson has served on the board of Grace Foods and Services, on the executive councils of the Jamaica Employees Federation and the Jamaica Association of Safety Professionals. In 2014, she assumed her current role of Chief Supply Chain Officer of Grace Foods Division, with responsibility for the transition of the supply chain from one with a domestic emphasis to one with a global focus. Of course, as part of the process of Grace Kennedy's moves to realize a global objective. Ladies and gentlemen, I want for you to help me to welcome Mrs. Diane Robinson. Next on the panel, we have Mr. Audley Deirdre. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Airports Authority of Jamaica and Norman Manley International Airport Limited, a position he has occupied since March 2015. He joined the organization in 2005 as Vice President of Finance. Some of you would say finance. In subsequent years, the information, communication technology, human resource, and administrative functions were added to his portfolio of responsibilities. That says to me that he is quite broad in terms of his knowledge base. In his capacity as president and CEO, Mr. Deirdre oversees the private concession management of the Santos International Airport, which is operated by MBJ Airports Limited, and the Norman Manley International Airport, operated by PAC Kingston Airport Limited. This is in addition to the direct management of Ian Fleming International Airport and 3 domestic aerodromes, Tinsapen, Ken Jones, and Negril. Ladies and gentlemen, we are extremely privileged and honored to have Mr. Diedrich with his busy schedule to join us this afternoon to share his knowledge with us. And finally, but indeed not the least, Mr. Edmund Marsh. He would like to be called Mr. Edmund E. Marsh, and so I will call him such. He's the Vice President of Business Development at the Port Authority of Jamaica. He has a wide range of industry and management experiences spanning more than 37 years across various countries, including the United Kingdom, United States of America, and the Caribbean. His raft of experience covers industries such as manufacturing and distribution, management consulting, I'm going to ask for you to mute your mic, please, as well as holding senior positions in the local port authority and a financial service group. Mr. Marsh joined the Port Authority in November 2010 and played a key roles in what he does.
Oh, yes, man, come look here.
Please mute your mic. Please mute your mic, everybody. Please mute your mic. Key roles and responsibilities of Mr. Marsh in coordinating and development of specific logistics projects that fall under the purview of the Port Authority of Jamaica. He has done extensive work on development of Jamaica's Logistics Hub Initiative and development of various business projects and opportunities for PAJ.
Introduction.
I must tell you, I must add that in Mr. Marsh's time of relaxation, I would call that, in giving back, he serves as a master teacher, in my view, in the MSc Logistics and Supply Chain Management program here at Mona School of Business and Management at UA. And might I suggest that you are missing out if there is anyone here who has not yet applied to and registered for this program, right? If you're interested in logistics and supply chain management, this is a program that you can. And so, ladies and gentlemen, these are our three panelists, and we ask that you welcome them, and they'll be sharing and all of that. Before I proceed, though, in giving a short overview and kind of lay the framework within which the discussion will occur, I'm going to just ask those involved in this space, I'm going to just beg of you, pretty please, just to mute your mic, please, all right, because if it is not, we're going to be having feedback and it will not be pleasant for everyone. And we want this to be a pleasant engagement. Please? All right. With regard to just a short overview of logistics, because some of you might have come into this space and say, what is logistics and what is supply chain management? Are they the same? Right? Why we made a distinction between the two. But as we explore the tenets of logistics and supply chain management, it must be understood that though the term supply chain management actually entered the literature in about 1982, when it was coined, the discipline and practice has been in existence for centuries, way back, even during the time when they were building the Tower of Babel, all right? And we can talk a little more about that when you come in my class. Over the years, the term logistics and supply chain management have been used interchangeably, but there is a subtle and some will say not so subtle difference between the two concepts. Essentially, logistics has a military origin, really, and is used to be associated with the movement of troops and their supplies in the battlefield. So that's the genesis of logistics. As the term migrated into the business field, logistics has become synonymous with the set of activities ranging from procurement of raw materials to delivery of the final good or service to the end consumer. So logistics usually refers to the managing of the flow within a company and between a company and its suppliers and customers. Supply chain management, on the other hand, refers to the management or controlling, monitoring of the integrated, and notice that word, integrated network processes of an organization, providing the end consumer with a product or service that will meet all of their requirements. It includes numerous aspects of logistics, of course, and demand planning. And so therefore, terms such as inventory management sometimes would be within this space. So in short, logistics management mostly involves transportation functions, focus on short-term goals, usually concentrates on getting freight from point A to point B on time and the most cost-efficient way possible. Supply chain management, on the other hand, controls a broader number of functions, focus on achieving customer satisfaction and maximizing profit on a long-term basis. So if you do a supply chain management course, by extension, you would cover aspects of logistics. I hope I have not confused you to the point where you'd want to leave, but if I did confuse you, I'm sure that the panelists will help to sort that out. And so our discussion this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, will be driven on these platforms. And these questions will be the drivers. What are the current happenings in various areas? Export and import, world trade, logistics and movement of goods locally and around the world, airport and the courier services. So panelists will address these. What are some of the fallouts in the logistics and global supply due to the COVID pandemic? Strategies being used to mitigate any fallout, right? And so therefore, these are some of the areas we'll be covering. And of course, we talk about expectations for the future. You have listened to me long enough, maybe even longer than you would have wanted to. And so I'm now going to go to the knowledge base that you have come to hear. And first of all, we're going to now ask that each panelist will give a presentation for about 10 minutes, after which we'll have some discussion and some question and answer. And we'll be starting the discussion with Mrs. Diane Robinson. Would you help me to welcome her, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you some of the knowledge around the supply chain management and this remarkable event called COVID-19 that we have all had to deal with in the last about 90 days or there's about. All right, so what are the current happenings in the supply chain field? Now that we know that COVID is here and is going to be with us for quite some time, the supply chain has had to respond in ways that if we had woken up in January, this would not have been a consideration. So some of the things that have now taken place is that a lot of businesses are now looking to reduce their reliance on China. So there is a movement towards what we call near sourcing, either bringing production back home, wherever home is, or bringing it closer in a region. So for us, it would be Caribbean, Central and South America, and to a lesser extent, North America. We are also looking at, and our suppliers are looking at actually, what we call prioritized production. So whereas we had a supply chain that had a variety and a plethora of offerings, we have now been whittled down to what I call essentials and relevant products for the consumer's current needs as dictated by the COVID pandemic. We are also dealing with export restrictions. As you may be aware, there have been some countries that have limited the export of certain materials because they're holding them for domestic use. And also some of our suppliers have actually gone that route, even if their particular country hasn't taken that decision, that there are certain items that they are not going to export. So now we have to adjust. So some of our businesses are left without many of their, let's call them their A items. So it is, what do we do in response to that? And that will come a little bit later. our supply chain activities are now centered around those relevant topic products. So if we've had, again, dealing with, in the case of Grace Kennedy globally, we deal with about 3,000 different SKUs. Right now, our focus is not on the 3,000. It is probably on the half of them that are relevant to needs of consumers right at this point. What we are wrestling with also is the fact that those SKUs that consumers are not particularly interested in right now, not their focus items, we now have to manage that inventory because shipments, the pipeline was there, shipments are coming in, and now you have inventory that is growing. And as you know, inventory represents cash that's sitting there and doing nothing. And we have to determine how best do we manage this before it becomes a case of you are now writing off expired materials or having to do fire sales so that you minimize your losses. The forecasting space, which is where a lot of us live constantly, has now become very unstable because if you think back to our behaviors as collective consumers back in March, nobody would have predicted the run on sanitizers and all the things that were deemed to be necessary, toilet paper that you needed to have to deal with COVID. And accordingly, any forecast that was done at that time wasn't even worth the paper that it was on. And while things are beginning to stabilize now, it is not settled. So it's a very, very dynamic space. Right, so that's the current happenings that we have to deal with. All right. Fallouts because of the pandemic. I alluded to it earlier, product availability. We now are in a situation where our suppliers have said, look, we cannot provide you with all the variants that we used to. So these are the ones that will be offered. And the decision is, will you take it or won't you take it? And then our decision becomes, will the consumer accept a different size or format than they have been accustomed to? In addition to that, there is the specter of limited availability because, again, they are wrestling with the issues of getting inputs because a lot of us depended on China, and where those input pipelines dried up, it meant going to other sources which may not have been as available. So products are being basically rationed. Lead times have become much, much longer. Our South American supplies, where we used to go anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks, that is now out at 12 weeks, and in some cases even longer, because, well, as you're aware, COVID is still very rampant in the South American continent, and therefore planning becomes a lot more difficult in respect to the fact that we don't know in some cases whether the shipment is going to arrive. I mean, case in point, just this morning, we have a shipment that has been tied up in Mexico for about 4 weeks, and we still don't know when it is going to leave. And the question is, how do you plan around that? How does a factory plan around that? Because this is a factory input. What do we do? We have, unfortunately, been faced with the loss of suppliers because they have not been able to ride out the impact of COVID. These are smaller suppliers, albeit, but again, when the proverbial dust settles, I'm sure that there are going to be some of even our larger suppliers who will not look the way they did prior to February, March 2020. But unfortunately, we are looking at the loss of some of our smaller supply. We mentioned the inventory buildup. Again, products that our consumers are not interested in now, things that don't have anything to do with hygiene and health and wellness, we are now having to work out how do we manage the inflows of those, and for where we have not been able to turn off the pipeline, literally, we have to manage the sale of those so that we don't have losses because of expiry. All right, strategies to mitigate the fallout. One of the ones that we had to call upon very quickly when we realized what COVID meant for us was to have early, frequent communication with our suppliers. The whole supply management process is one about building relationships, and we had to call upon those relationships and really dig deep with them to ensure that our supplies kept going, because as you can appreciate, suppliers have several customers, and all the customers are now at them saying, I want, how much can you give me? When can you give it to me? So I like to think the ones who had the best relationship with their suppliers came out with the best outcome from this. We've also had to resort to advancing shipments. So where we may not have wanted to have a product come in yet because of the current inventory level, we had no choice but to actually bring it so that we wouldn't lose out on the opportunity to have that inventory in our warehouse and not in somebody else's warehouse, because we were managing inventory so tightly. Some of our suppliers have asked us to actually start paying them early. So credit terms that would have worked to our advantage in another place and time, where we had to park those and go to either paying upfront or paying before the shipment actually even arrived in Jamaica, just to ensure that we kept the relationship on an even keel. Alternate supply sources was another mitigating strategy that we did. It is our endeavor to have alternate sources for many of our key and strategic products, and we had to pull on those alternate sources very quickly. Some of them, we did put them under a lot of stress because they had been used to doing smaller orders, and suddenly the orders ballooned on them. But again, it's a different time, and the ones who could respond are the ones who will be around for the foreseeable future. I spoke about the whole forecasting and demand planning process, and that has now increased in frequency. Our typical cycle would have been monthly. Now, in the case of some of our business units, we've actually had to go to a weekly planning process with them to ensure that we kept on top of what was coming in, what the market needed, and how we could mitigate any fallouts that would have occurred because of the supplier's inability to meet the needs. All right, and expectations for the future. So COVID has proved to be what we call the great accelerator, things that we have been talking about and thinking it would be nice to implement. We've now had to do them and do them very, very quickly. So online has become almost a new normal. Digitization is part of our new normal now. New supply routes where we may have thought about it, but dragged our feet in having it done. We've had to pick up the pace and actually activate them really quickly and reduce our dependence on sources out of China. So now we are looking to Vietnam. We're actually looking to Mexico for some of our sources. And this is not going to be just a flash in the pan. I think this is going to be part of our new normal. One of the things that it has also accelerated is the whole business of supply chain mapping. We have been doing it, but we've been doing it at a measured pace. And now we're going to have to make very fast inroads to know where our supplies are, where are the risks, how to mitigate those risks to ensure that should something like this happen again, and chances are it will, that we don't get caught flat-footed as many of us did in March 2020. All right, I think that about sums it up for where we sat in Grace Kennedy and how we've managed COVID from a supply chain perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Robinson. I'm going to be asking those who have questions, hold your questions, because I suspect that you have a number of questions. She talked about the fallout of product availability. She touched on important areas such as forecasting and implication on forecasting. Though she did not mention the concept explicitly, for those persons who and all of that would have been aware, it would have had the bullwhip effect. She talked about lead times in terms of increase in lead time, 6 to 8 weeks now become 10 to 12 weeks. There's also would have been implication for perishable item in the way we manage those. And the important area which is now emerging and gaining quite a bit of traction within the literature and the logistics supply chain management space, and that has to do with supply chain mapping. All right. And of course, one of the common denominators of this is that COVID-19 being called the great accelerator, where those who would have been sitting on their comfortable would now have to get up and be active and have to move fast. All right. And so she covered a number of areas, and I know that a number of questions would be emerging. But they're going to ask that you, again, place your questions in the chat and make them available, because we are going to now go to Mr. Audley Deirdre, who is now going to be make his presentation on guided by the same set of questions. Mr. Deirdre?
Good afternoon to you, moderator, Dr. Nicholson, and my fellow panelists, and of course, the attendees today to this webinar presentation. As we have all known, aviation has been one of those major insertions in the history of our beautiful world that has more or less changed the face of how this globe operates. Aviation itself, having been around from about 2005, had morphed subsequently into civil aviation in subsequent years. And as I've said, it has proven to be one of the key catalysts of economic growth and development in the modern world as we know it today. Yes, we have the ICT industry, which we all know how significant a change maker that has been. And the ICT industry brought the world into our offices and homes, and even travel around with us by way of our mobile devices. But aviation, colleagues, and civil aviation in particular, is what really connects the world physically. And in the same way, therefore, that ICT connects the world electronically through routers using hubs and switches, aviation, I am positing, connects the world through the physical routers, which we call aircraft and airports. Today, therefore, it is because of aviation, while the world has seen over 9 billion passengers transported in 2019, and the growth that is forecast at 6% per year will take the numbers to 21 billion persons traveling by 2040. It is because of aviation why tourism represents 20% of world aviation traffic. But in that same vein, aviation itself represents 50%, 55% of world tourism traffic, which therefore means a significant number of other travel by aircraft and air is not tourism related. It is also because of aviation why in a tourism dependent country like Jamaica, our airport traffic was 6.5 million in 2019, but with tourism representing 80% of that number. It is also the same reason why over 40% of world cargo by value is transported by air, even though only 1% of volume that figure represents. And I will explain a little later the importance of this 1% by volume, but 40% by value. World cargo recorded, that is air cargo, recorded 53 million tons in 2018. But unfortunately for us, Jamaica, we are not very powerful on air cargo. So we only did approximately 16 tons in that same year. And this is an area that Jamaica is basically now turning its sights and focus to develop a more powerful cargo-based, air cargo-based industry. It is because of aviation why sporting and entertainment events such as horse racing, motor car racing, athletics, football, stage shows, all these things can be done across the globe in quick succession because aviation enables the fast and efficient movement of the animals that are required for horse racing, equipment for sporting events and entertainment events, and the performers themselves that are transported seamlessly in quick time to be appearing at several venues, sometimes in a matter of hours apart. Aviation is what creates this kind of possibility. Most importantly, or as importantly, we have now come into the era of e-commerce, and it is aviation why perishable goods, including horticulture, medical supplies, and technology, and components that are used in technological assemblage are seamlessly moved by air to facilitate use, assembly, and most importantly, just in time, in a just-in-time manner. It is aviation why shopping for anything no longer requires taking a long drive to the mall or taking a plane or asking a friend or family member overseas to buy these items and take or send them with someone else who is coming home. Thanks to e-commerce, online shopping made possible by civil aviation. So yes, ICT is a major enabler in this whole process, but you still need the physical connectivity to move what ICT provide in the logistics chain. And so it is because of the power of aviation why in 2018, based on economic impact reports, that world aviation generated $2.7 trillion in GDP, contributing 63 million jobs and some 8% of GDP, world GDP. That's the power of aviation, colleagues. I turn quickly to the structure of the industry and therefore how it facilitates the logistics chain that we are talking about. So the industry comprises of a number of players. Firstly, you have the airlines and different types thereof, cargo carriers, passenger carriers. And I must say at this point that while we have dedicated cargo carriers, majority of world cargo by air is carried in the bellies of passenger planes, aircraft. So that's the importance of passenger carriage across the globe. And when we come to discuss impact of COVID-19, you will understand why when these passenger planes are grounded because borders are closed, our persons not traveling, you are essentially as well giving up, if you will, cargo space. You have also in the industry, the airports, several types that does different things. You have dedicated cargo airports, you have mixed use airports that deal with passengers and cargo, and some airports that has private aviation activities as well. You have air navigation service that deals with the aeronautical activities and telecommunication and meteorological services, and of course, importantly, air traffic services. And the last major stakeholder group in the aviation industry, your passengers, which there's a wide range of classification of passengers, but tourists is a significant element of that. The other major set is what they call visiting friends and relatives, persons who travel for leisure and for visiting family. So who are the functionaries in the industry and which are part players in the whole business of logistics chain management? Travel agency play their roles in terms of moving the people. Naturally, the airlines, as I said before, especially those in cargo, but yes, passenger planes take cargo in a significant way. Ground handlers at the airports who deals with the logistics of managing the aircraft on the ground and its contents. Catering service. You have ground transportation, various forms, some for people, some for goods. And of course, you have a range of concessionaires and other business facilities, fuel suppliers, and so on that completes the process at the airport. I'm making this point because I'm pointing specifically to persons who have interest in aviation and its relation to logistics chain management, the different aspects of the industry in which they can find a niche to operate and to conduct their business or peddle, or should I say, supply their profession. But all of this was good, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going pretty fine. And as we have all known, then came COVID-19 and the world has been brought to its knees. This brought with it the massive fall off in aviation and the tourism industry, which I would posit probably is the most significantly hit industry arising from the COVID pandemic. And it is because, unlike cargo and goods, COVID attacks persons. And so persons stop traveling, countries close their borders, rules have been brought in that restricted travel and movements. And so the tourism and aviation industry was almost completely shut down. This brought with it a massive loss of revenues across the sector, leading to significant fall in GDPs of the respective states and territories. So we are now forced to reset the clock of the aviation industry. GDP, which was the primary baseline proxy to use, that is used to forecast traffic growth and numbers in the industry, no longer has this place, because as you know, the fall in the industry was not directly connected to GDP per se, but the imperatives of the virus, which meant that, for instance, in Jamaica, aviation traffic fell by 99% in April, 1 month.
Wow.
So our GDP didn't fall by 99%, if you see what I'm saying. So that's why I said a proxy for aviation statistics would have changed because of the pandemic. Aircraft and airports and their capacities will have to be rescoped and rescaled because of distancing requirement for transporting people and distancing requirement for accommodating passengers through our airports. So even as the airports have recently been, well, the airports were never closed, I must say, but even as the government recently reopened the borders, and we expect and are seeing traffic beginning to flow at higher numbers through the airports, the fact is we are able to cope now because the numbers are not yet at their previous levels. But with the type of spacing that has to be facilitated in our airports, the stages of passenger processing and cargo processing and the separation required and all these things means that if we should process the numbers that we had pre-COVID, the present footprint of the facilities may not hold up. And this is a problem that the industry will face across the globe. So the other issue is these things therefore will impact on the efficiency, cost, and viability, which will swing out of line in opposite directions. So as efficiency and capacity constraints creates problem, cost will increase and viability will decrease. Therefore, to balance this equation, the cost of travel and even the cost to deal with cargo shipment may very well see significant increase in the resurgence of this sector. Good thing for this is that when these things happen, as what happened with 9/11, when new security measures were brought in, technology was introduced and implemented to reverse the impact of the inefficiencies that manual processes would have created. And so we expect that with the COVID-19 pandemic now with us, we have to learn to operate and live with it. And technologies we expect will be created and deployed to reverse the impact of manual processes, separations, and all these things. So we expect technology over time, very short time, to bring equilibrium back to the industry. Air cargo is the same story, but with different drivers. So air cargo, while it is not attacked by COVID-19, but you do understand that economic recession will impact the level of cargo being procured for use or for trade. Businesses would have been closing or part of using goods produced and supplied by the air cargo services. Tourism gone. The sports and entertainment industry to which I spoke would no longer be around, at least for now. And so the drive that these businesses places on cargo is also not there. So we'll likely see a negative trend in air cargo in this period because of these things. But there is one positive for air cargo. It is e-commerce, where it is likely to thrive even greater than before as it replaces physical travel for business and leisure shopping. So coming out of this massive COVID-19 setback, ladies and gentlemen, the actions to be taken to recover or to function in this new paradigm is supply chain and logistics management will become one of the most critical player and important tool of trade. And this is why this discussion today is important. And as the previous speaker said, this is a new paradigm created by this virus. And so the way we do things, the way we organize ourselves will be in a different form. Going forward, therefore, from this setback, I will use a quote by Napoleon Hill, which states, "Focus on the possibilities for success and not on the potential for failure as we pedal through," and this is my addition now, as we pedal through this process of responding and surviving in a COVID-present operating environment. Thank you.
Wow. Mr. Diedrich, thank you very much. Thank you very much for, in a very complimentary way, adding to what Mrs. Robinson have covered. And you covered certainly from the aviation perspective, but we also realizing that in your coverage, the interconnectiveness, if you please. Sometimes we see aviation out there, and without your presentation, we might have been tempted to believe that, though we would see the connection with tourism, we might not have even recognized the tremendous impact and the opportunities, as you mentioned, for the acceleration of technologies. And there are many opportunities out there for those who would seek to be entrepreneurial, I'm sure. You also point us of the need to focus on the possibilities, all right? And without, if you please, my word be constrained by all of those things or hurdles. So thank you very much. And I'm sure that those persons who have done a master's in logistics and supply chain management, they were very happy to have heard that when you said that to become the centerpiece of where we go forward. And indeed, we even say in making a plug here that at Monosclef Business Management, we have opening for those persons who are not yet on the train. Come and sign up, register. We have space for you because you need to be part of the value chain. All right? So we have heard from Mrs. Robinson, we have heard from Mr. Diedrich, and I'm sure that your questions are coming in. And so please continue to write your question in the chat because we're coming to that. We want to welcome those who have joined a little late, but I'm sure that you would have heard the presentation and it's been recorded, by the way. And so we go to now Mr. Edmund Marsh, who would now speak from his perspective and the perspective, I'm not sure the perspective from which you'll be choosing, but he's so eclectic in his thinking that he can speak about anything. So we'll give him that chance. So Marsh?
Thank you, Dr. Nicholson. Good afternoon to the audience and my fellow panelists. I think it's coming at this last part of the wicket. It poses a problem because both Diane and Audley mentioned some of the things which I'd like to talk about. So, I just try to add some elements, speak a little bit about some of the global, a couple of things about the global environment that has affected us, touch a little bit on the supply chain level, and bring that down and speak a little bit about what we have seen at our local level, in particular on the maritime side. Now, Audley mentioned all those, the great aspect of the air cargo industry and the air services, and that is an air transportation, a very important part. We look at the leg within supply chain, you certainly need air, but in addition to that, there is the slow coach, the water transport, which provides the bulk of cargo movement across the globe. Now, we are fortunate in Jamaica that we actually plays a big role in global cargo movement through our ports. We are blessed in having an excellent location within the global industry. And over the years, Jamaica has capitalized on that locational advantage and established ourselves within the maritime space. So the Port of Kingston is ranked among the top 100 global ports and rank about 7 or 8 within Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's in that context then, because of the global nature in which the port community operates and the maritime sector operates in Jamaica, is to say, well, how we have to look at what's going on in the globe. Whenever we we have, and I think Diane mentioned the whole importance of forecasting, and looking at how investments within the sector. We have to be thinking about what's going to happen within the global space. So the COVID pandemic, at least since late last year, early this, and certainly for the first half of the year, we're still going through the effects and learning a little bit more to go about COVID. But essentially, most countries, have adopted a strategy to try and steer their economies into balancing the risk of health as well as economic, try and come to some ground that will allow them to cope with and everyone is fearing things like recessions and so on. So that led to restrictions. We heard some from Dan of the impact of some of those restrictions and quarantines and closures in factories, job losses, and in addition to that, those aspects, countries put in fiscal and monetary measures to try and reduce the impact of at least ensure that the economy can go on even during those times. Even in Jamaica, we saw we're fortunate the government was able to put in certain measures to try and reduce the impact of that. But one of the outcomes that we're seeing, and for example, IMF recently indicated that one of the big issues is the speed and scale of how investments were hit, especially among developing economies, where there was a lot of outflows within the emerging markets, and in addition to the outflows in capital, you find a lot of countries were actually going to the IMF to look financing at the same time. So the slowdown in FDI's foreign direct investments, is something that we have to be looking and be aware of. And in fact, Untitled estimated that this about 30 to 40% will occur within 2021. And of course, as an emerging economy, like ourselves, we meet some effect on that. So we have to be aware of what's going on in the global economy. At the supply chain level, one of the big things that you'll ask and you will see is how fragile global supply chain has proven to be. And at the core of global, so we'll push for globalization, global production networks. At the core heart of it really is the fact that the production centers in Asia, Europe, and emerging markets were all impacted, and we have all felt the result of that. Multinationals, corporation, face shocks, and demand fell, stay at home came into being. Consumers and governments began to struggle to procure materials. We heard from Diane about that, and so all of that helped to drive home the fact that this push for globalization, perhaps, where the drive is to try and satisfy consumer demand to ultimately generate surplus and to the bottom line. We took an oversimplistic view of it, and we may have to rethink that going forward. Something of what has COVID done, and how do we look ahead to start to certain things are become clear, that at the national level, governments have to start putting policies that will stimulate and continue to stimulate, and perhaps even do some coordinated responses and countries. And I remember the Prime Minister speaking about that recently at in New York at when he spoke at this conference among world leaders, and that also brought into question countries rethinking about where they put production facilities, and the whole nearshoring, bringing back national production investments and so on, rethinking the supply chain. So that is something that Jamaica's case, we're looking to see if we can benefit from that in the sense of nearshoring. The biggest market in the global hemisphere is actually just across from us. And we're hoping that that stimulates some interest in having Jamaica play a bigger role in supply chains. In fact, I can say, Dr. Nichols, over the last 2 weeks, I've been getting increasing communication from countries from Europe, from the Middle East. This morning I was speaking to someone from India, now showing interest in looking and see how Jamaica can play a part and they're willing to now come in and look at industries that pose some very good opportunities, the non-traditional type industries, and looking to create a presence and within this side of the world. Diane mentioned about the need for digitalization of supply chains. You know, again, that is something that we think has been happening, and within our markets, we'll need to see that happening even more so. Fortunately, there are some things that are happening which helps. The port community system is well advanced. The customs systems, ASACUDA, again, integrated. And the whole idea is to improve the information flow between the different parties, create visibility and speed at improving the effectiveness of communication within the industry. What has happened to our port? The Port of Kingston has 2 major players. Sorry, Kingston Freeport Terminal, which is a company that has been set up to manage the concession agreement that is now approaching its, I think, so 4 years, the 4th year, where the container terminal was divested by way of a 30-year concession. And I must say that they have done a tremendous job in rebuilding the infrastructure of the facility to make it more world-class, and happy to say that the Port of Kingston is totally Panama capable, so that we can handle all the vessels that traverse the Panama Canal. And we have been seeing increased dimensions in the vessels that brings cargo to Kingston, and that of course required significant investments in improved infrastructure, technology, training of the human capital and development to cope with these much larger, more complex vessels. Just beside the container terminal is another modern facility, the Kingston Wharves Limited, that handles a lot of the mixed port. While the container terminal is, as it says, container terminal, maybe 99% of cargo, and the other Kingston Wharves is a mixed-use terminal that focuses on domestic and regional cargo, as well as developing logistics. They have now introduced a transshipment car hub, so diversified to create more opportunities for the region as well. In terms of cargo over the Cape Tail, just to compare briefly the latter part of the year, so between October and up to now, what has happened is that using October as a reference point, domestic cargo at Cape Tail, and these are containers, fell off by about 10% up to December, and leveled off by February a little bit below 10%. On the other hand, transshipment cargo, which is the main activity that the port actually does, 90% of the cargo passes over the port, relates to transshipment, which is global cargo moving within the global space. And And here the big ships are connected to and relays cargo from large ships to small ships, or just connect from large destinations like Kingston. They'll then stop at another large port to discharge quite a bit of cargo and take on a lot of cargo. Transshipment went up in December by about 10–11%, peaked in February, and remained flat from March to May, and in line essentially with what was the status in October. So when you combine that performance with domestic, you find that overall the KFTL was about 10% down at the end of 2019, and 10% in February, leveled off marginally by May in 2020. So, you know, what it's saying is that global cargo is still moving. Cargo is still moving across the globe. And it was not as affected as how the global cargo market still move. People still have to eat. People still have to get supplies, and therefore some resilience was the global business. Kingston Wharf, unfortunately, didn't fare that well. Similar, in a similar vein, they experienced some in containers. They fell by about 10% at the end of the quarter four. Picked up back, but not picked up. They actually fell worse in the since 2020, the first quarter of 2020 and second quarter for containers. I mean, an indication of the impact of movement within the local market. So this is in line with what Diane mentioned, that the cargo was just not there within during the COVID time. Motor vehicle units, similar decline. Other cargo like bulk cargo and so on fell a little less. So overall, the domestic market did have some more severe impact on global cargo. So, that sort of give you a backdrop as to what happened. Now, looking ahead, what do we do? And the government itself has put in a number of measures. So, in fact, over the years, the government has been improving investments within infrastructure, and not just the government. I must add that both the government and private sector have made significant investments over the last 10 years in the infrastructure so we have a good stage to improve on the logistics performance. So the platform of air, sea, technology, human capital, road network, all there's a good foundation to be capitalized on, and that's why people are now getting a little interested more interested in Jamaica. As I said, I've been getting a little bit more calls these days, inquiring what is it that we're doing, and how can they get more information. Business climate is improving. Our debt to GDP has improved significantly and continues to improve, except that the intervening factor, COVID, now will slow us down again. But we think we are resilient enough because we have the infrastructure, we have the training, the people with Mona School of Business and the other institutions having adopted logistics as a big source driver for growth, had made the investments in providing more facilities for that area. So all in all, there are lessons that we can learn going forward. Certainly, globalization was impacted, and the rapid scale, at which it impacted all of us was clear and seen. And we see where companies like Grace Kennedy and so on adjusting their strategies, how to deal with that in the short term. Then there's a medium-term plan of how to to move on and over long term, how to become more resilient. So I will stop there and leave the rest to maybe during the question and answer to address.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Marsh. Thanks. So we have had three persons from different angles, and certainly we are told that the water transport provide the bulk of cargo, and I spoke to that very expertly, and said that Jamaica is primarily located. Location is indeed one of our advantages. I did not know that that Port of Kingston is in the mode of the which I call Panama ready, and certainly I know that a question should be coming up in that, right? But we're going to be opening up for questioning from those who are all right, who are in the space and would have posted their question. And certainly one of the first questions that was posted, I think it was directed to Mrs. Robinson. All right, and it says, thank you, Mrs. Robinson. In terms of the inventory that was in the pipeline that had to be managed, could you share with us a bit more on the practical strategies used in your dealings with your local suppliers of perishables?
Okay. Our local suppliers, and I'm going to assume that Marlene Lamont is referring to our farmers. That one wasn't that difficult because we actually were already in the process of processing the input. So for example, at our Hounslow plant, where we process the scallion and the pepper mash, we had actually started doing processing. So when those came in, we handled that. And what it meant for us is that we just needed more and more storage to accommodate the influx of agricultural product, meaning the scallion and the peppers. On the other products which would have been coming from outside of the region, things like dairy products that we do bringing, and things that we were actually bringing for the hotel sector, which that came to us screeching halt. We basically, two things we did. We had the conversation with the suppliers. Can we divert any of it that was not proprietary branded, or would you be able to hold it? And where they couldn't hold it, then we knew we had to take it, and it meant in some cases finding additional storage for them. But again, because of the relationship that we have to have with our suppliers, combination of strategies that we had to use. There was no one way that we handled it. So every supplier, every product kind of had to be handled differently.
All right, thank you very much. Right, and a question that comes to Mr. Mark is what specific steps would you consider that we'll have to take now in the medium term with regard to Jamaica's logistics hub initiative in order to maximize the nearshore opportunity to which you spoke? Samash? You need to unmute?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that question. That is something which, in a way, we even prior to COVID and so on, we have been preparing for as a part of logistics as a big part of the economic success of Jamaica going forward. So the first thing, infrastructure, right? And if you notice, I started and mentioned the port. Port is modern, one of the most modern ports in the region. The airport, with privatization process into international, bringing international best practices and so on, improving those and the market access and so on. So infrastructure, we have good road network, so we can move cargo in and out from the ports into the hinterland and back, so that factories can connect to the ports. A lot of times people talk about customs as being the customs have been doing tremendous work in modernizing their systems, and technology is playing a big role. The port community system I mentioned before is a way in which that has been put in a platform to facilitate movements within the port area, the interface between the ports and the users. We also have been really the government and the Port Authority. We have invested quite a bit in building warehouses. And we have a warehouse that's about to, that will soon be finished to improve on that aspect of logistics, which we are not able to in the past, because what we had were not very modern facilities. Kingston Walls invested in a facility a few years ago, and some of the companies like Think and so on, they have all made tremendous improvements in those facilities. In addition to that, the government has put in a special economic zone authority, which manages the things like incentives and various types of incentives to encourage people to become more competitive within a global space. And the legal framework that will allow a lot of, that will support that environment. So the whole ecosystem is now better geared to support logistics. Last thing I mentioned, even things like financing. You'll be surprised to know how much financing is now available at very attractive terms within Jamaican market. This was not the case all along. So, that aspect is there to support the industry. The human capital, we are building on that, and so on. So the more processes are being looked at to improve the flow of information and goods, in and out of our ports and so on. There's still some way to go. We're not there yet. Security is still an issue of security of a cargo and cargo movement, and something that, because we operate in an international space, we have to be very, very, we have to pay attention to that.
Thanks, Mr. Marsh. And what we're also going to be working on the local scene is to see if we can get the supply chain and logistics to enhance your network. So we have been breaking up a little bit, but we can work on that, and we'll work on that, I'm sure. Another question comes from, I think it's come from Marisan. It said, what changes to current regulations will be required to make transition to focus on air cargo viable? And that seemed to be directed to Mr. Diedrich. And then there is a part B to the question. It says, will there have to be less restrictions on licensing and fees with regard to export? You get that question, Mr. Diedrich? I'm going to repeat it. What changes to current regulations will be required to make a transition to a focus on air cargo viable? And the other part of the question, will there have to be less restrictions on licensing and fees with regard to export? All right, and I think that's directed to Mr. Diedrich.
I would want to start firstly with the second question, because it is easier to pass along as a matter which is not really in my view. As when it comes to levies and taxes, we all know that that is a matter that is driven by the government, and
Yes.
objectives for revenue securing.
Yes.
In terms of regulations to facilitate air cargo development, there are several levels that we might want to contemplate. First, the actual establishment of airports and airport facilities. And I would say that there is not much change required in that regard, because as I mentioned in my presentation, even our present airports, Sangster and Norman Manley, and small Ian Fleming out in Boscobel, these airports can, in fact, in their present form, seamlessly just simply increase their cargo activities by having the players on board to generate that business. If it comes down now to a cargo only airport, as is being contemplated for Vernon Field, then you find that it would be a game changer in that regard. And there you might find certain amendments that would need to be made to some of our acts relating to aviation, our Airport Authority Act, if the Airport Authority is to be the developer of that facility. You would also find, I would want to think that if you're going air cargo at that scale, or even going at this present level, the discussions that were mentioned earlier by Ed about the Special Authority, then those enabling regulations are already in place to facilitate this kind of bulk, movement of cargo and incentives to investors in the industry. So I join with Ed there to say that technically speaking, the environment, the regulations that enables the expansion of cargo is substantially in place.
Yeah.
Comes, and I guess anyone could take that because it's generic in nature, is that they want to know what are the plans for logistics in the agricultural industry. And this, of course, the agricultural industry being an important area and all of that. So what are the plans, if anybody knows? And I suspect Mrs. Robinson might be able to say something on this, given the interrelatedness of what Grace does with the agriculture sector. But I would want each person to tap into this, because I think it's one of those questions that will have application to each of the areas. Mrs. Robinson?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that one. It's what we are doing now is working with our pool of farmers to, one, streamline their whole production process so that our two agro-processing facilities, one in Hounslow, one in Denby, are kept properly supplied with the inputs for the finished products, the jerk seasonings, etc., and the canned products that we do. We have done a fair bit in terms of the agro park and the infrastructure around the agro park and assisting the farmers to move their produce from there to one or both of those facilities, depending on where the need is. The whole planning of the growth of the products, that's something that we are still, I want to say, having a challenge with, because we're not quite there in terms of a scientific basis to ensure that it is perfectly matched between what comes out of the ground and what the consumer is demanding at a particular point in time. But we're getting there, and I think in another, let's say another 2 years, we should be in a much better place in marrying both sides, so that it's more coordinated and the logistics of it flows better.
All right, thanks, Mrs. Robinson. Any of the other panelists want to maybe, step into that, because that's implication for each of the areas.
Yeah, if I could just quickly add to that before I forget. The port of Montego Bay, for example, has been significantly upgraded, both the cargo as well as the the cruise side, and investments have been made essentially to improve as part of the process, the logistics of goods passing over the port in Montego Bay, specifically for the hospitality, and more and more these days, the home porting market. Well, when cruise business was, the tourism business was vibrant, well, and we expect that to return, and hopefully soon. That quite a bit of cargo actually, a bit of ships actually home port in Montego Bay. Now, what does that mean? Is that the journey for that cruise starts in Montego Bay. People are flying through to the airport and you know, go on their cruise from Montego Bay. So they need supplies. And you know, we have been talking to various providers of supplies, both in the agricultural space as well as the you know, these ships have to be so that is one area that we're looking to improve the agricultural market. And you know, why is it that we have a very huge tourist business and yet most of those goods have to be supplied from overseas? So we should really be looking to tap into the local market. And essentially, one of the calls I had this morning, in fact, was someone all the way from India, and that is one of the areas that they're interested in, is to establish, you know, agricultural and improve the agricultural supply chain aspect, as well as adding some technology to and make it more efficient. So, you know, we're hopeful that this is an area that we can see a lot more integration between the farm, the agricultural community, as well as the logistics, and all the way through to export as well, which again will utilize both air as well as water. I don't know if Audley want to add any.
I certainly want to add. I'm just waiting for the cue of the.
Yes, yeah, you go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Lest I step upon his ground.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
So yes, air cargo and, you know, the relatedness to that and the agricultural sector is very much a matter that is of interest to us in the airport system. Admittedly, it is not one of the more powerful aspects of our business so far, and it's something we want to see improved on. Jamaica's air cargo is majority import rather than export. And if we are to go export, then certainly apart from big ticket items like bauxite and these things, agriculture is one of those foundation things that we can improve upon, you know, facilitating the export. So we have warehousing at the airports and we have cargo handlers who facilitate this process, but significantly we have the Ministry of Agriculture that operate fumigation facilities here at Norman Manley and are planning at one stage to establish similar facilities in Sangster to deal with the preparation of export fresh produce and so on. I do know that they have put in place, registered their interest in securing sufficient land space for major expansion of those facilities going forward to do no other purpose than to expand the potential for farmers' cargo export.
That's right. So there are opportunities. I want to ask a question with regard to the mention of the because COVID-19, based on what Mr. Marsh, and indeed, all of you would have said that implicitly. Mr. Marsh was more explicit in saying that COVID-19 exposes the fragility of global supply chain and how we manage that and the implication for supply chain mapping and all of that. And so the question that I ask it, is this a stepping back from globalization as we know it and maybe more focus on domestic management of our affairs. That is to say, that rather than placing emphasis on external supply chain, that there might be the need to place more emphasis on our domestic supply chain. And for example, in my own area of research, where one of the documented disadvantages of family-owned business is that family-owned business is usually inward-looking. It seems to me that COVID-19 seems to be reversing that there is need to be inward-looking given the fragility of the global supply chain. Talk to me about that in anyone.
All right, I think I wouldn't say that we are moving away from globalization. I think we're taking a different approach to it, where we're looking closer to home, but yet still recognizing the need to also maintain our sources further away from home. Whereas, you know, at the beginning of this year, it was actually flipped, where we looked further afield because we wanted, you know, maybe there was a price sensitivity. Now, I think given what has happened since the beginning of the year, people are now willing to pay a little bit more to be a little more assured of supply consistency. But it doesn't mean that we're going to become totally inward. I don't think we can ever afford to do that. It just means we have to have more options.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you know, we envisioned going forward that yes, there will be a push towards regionalization and maybe some nationalization of but the intention, I think, is to, for example, for Jamaica to be seen as an attractive location to undertake and relocate, you know, what we like to see, for example, light manufacturing, more light manufacturing, some advanced processing taking place within the value chain, so we can, I think, create opportunities. But it's something that has to be very well managed. I don't think globalization will ever disappear. I mean, we all, you know, remember after the tsunami in Japan and those disasters, everybody for the first few months were, you know, focused on resilience, supply chain resilience, and so on, relocation to other locations and so on. But eventually, it was back to normal, which was, you know, going back to Asia as a major production source. So let's take the opportunity now to create an environment where we can be an attractive location. And I think we're doing a lot. You know, we are looking at energy, we are looking at increasing value chains within, you know, more value added input. We're putting in, as I mentioned, those other building the ecosystem. So, you know, let's focus on trying to equip Jamaica to position itself, you know, capitalize on what we already have, location, both in terms of sea and air, and investments in these facilities in their modernization.
I would like to add to that, which both panelists have mentioned, to say that aviation, by its very nature, is about globalization. And I would dare say even marine as well.
Yeah, it is.
And so, you know, we don't envisage anything being done to reduce or slow that progress and development with aviation and marine playing their role in engendering the supply chain management and globalization. Yes, the recent hiccup of the pandemic affected aviation significantly, but as we are hearing, it did not affect marine in the same way. And so all we need to do, as mentioned before, and it has been talked about for several years, strategic location of Jamaica.
Hello.
Strategic.
I would have hoped by now I get a chance to express my opinion. We have listened to you very keenly and carefully.
So Deidre, just complete, and then I'm gonna give Miss Diane Robinson wants to say something.
Okay, I'm saying that they talk for many decades of the strategic location of Jamaica as a country, both in this hemisphere and the world itself, must not be taken for granted.
Yeah.
And so we, especially because of that purpose, needs to continue to do what is necessary to realize and cash in on the benefit of that strategic location. And so we want to encourage globalization.
All right. So the question really is, it's not a situation where it's one or the other. It seems to me that what we say, that globalization will always be, just that we now need to ensure that our domestic network strengthen that in the event that there is a fall off or the globalization or the global aspect of the supply chain become more fragile, that we will not fall to pieces, but at least we'll have some domestic network in place that's strong. And now I want to invite some other persons to maybe give some contribution. And I see Mr. Henry Morant and all of that. So we're going to place him on the right. So allow him to unmute Mr. Morant, please, and he will be saying so. Mr. Morant. Mr. Morant, yes.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead. Good to have you.
Yes, thanks. I've listened carefully, and I believe the program has a great and tremendous far-reaching effect to transform the whole landscape of this country.
Yes.
But what I would have liked, as soon as COVID subside, all things equal, God's willing, we'll have a location like at a conference center where we can do a more, what you'd call person-to-person discussions. And, we can make, because this thing, what is happening, we need to have a broader community.
Yes.
We need to get more involvement, because listening to people carefully, we have so many things can make this thing work.
Yes.
Because this is the time, and the time is extremely right.
Yes.
I have watched on CNN some Jamaicans in the diaspora, more particularly in the United States and Canada, and they're all shooting in the same direction because something have to give so that this country, but they were more concerned, and there was more concentrating on crime. And as you know, if there's no atmosphere of peace and tranquility, production will never be able to grow. It will all be stifled. In addition to that, as a great or revere man, great Marcus Garvey says that where there's no history of your place of origin, is like a tree without a root. Yes. Which is very sad thing. Our greatest problem in this country, and I will not attempt to speak of the entire region, because as a Jamaican, and I'm proud to be a Jamaican, I strongly believe we are most left behind set of people in the English-speaking territories in the region, because we have not hung tightly onto some of the zenith that was left here with all of the period of enslavement and deprivation and denial of our ancestors. It is time for we to shake off that and get ourselves together. and move forward, because we have a serious problem in Jamaica. I'm going to say this. We have about 60 to 70% of the people not prepared to respond to growth. We need a drastic national draft when whether the GLP, the PNP come together and set up 4 locations, we can absorb at least 200 and say talk about 500,000 people. And put a serious dent on the system. You keep them into training, you're going to train them. The location eventually must become self-sufficient. It grows cash and stable crops, but history. And as a boy, I remember people discovered Cuba.
Your connection is poor, Mr. Martin, and all of that. But I got the point. I got the point, Mr.
You're not hearing me clearly?
No, but I got the point, because you'd appreciate.
Are you hearing me clearly?
No, yeah. But I'm also saying that I got the point that you're making. Right, there needs to be a mobilization of human resources, and we agree, in order to ensure that we can optimize our resources, and that can be done in a mobilized way. And so, and I also got the point that you're making, that as soon as this phase would have passed, we now need to be in a space where, beyond the virtual space, where maybe persons might be more feel freer and to give their contribution. And certainly that's one of the areas that we at the Mono School of Business and Management will look at and take up, and so on. And so, but thanks, Mr. Moran, for your contribution. And certainly remember that the copy of this presentation, in terms of recorded form, will be available at the website that you see there in the chat. So check your chat for that, right? Anybody else who wants to make a contribution as we wrap up, right? We're going to be wrapping up now. We're going way beyond the time, and it might be indicative of the interest and the value of what has been presented. Right? Just going to give one person another opportunity just to say something. If you're not forcing you to, but in the event. Well, I want, on behalf of the Mono School of Business and Management, to thank our panelists, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Dedrick, and Mr. Marsh, for bringing forth from the different angles. Really want to thank you. We believe that you have covered enough for us to deem this event to be a value-added event. And we hope that though we would not have covered all the areas, given the wide range, that enough would have, the appetite of persons would have been whetted enough that they would be interested in expanding their knowledge on the area. And remember that you can access the recording at the website that we have in chat, and at the Mono School of Business and Management, we continue to engage. So remember, anytime you need this kind of discussion, start with the Mono School of Business and Management again. Again, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Marsh, and Mr. Dedrick, thank you very, very much. And just in the event that you have a final sentence, not a paragraph now, there's a final sentence that you might want just to say in closing, that you might have, that's critical, that you might have left off and want to say it. All right, go ahead, any one of you.
The only thing I would leave the audience with is what I had said before, that COVID is the new accelerator, and we just need to pick up ourselves and do the things that we've been talking about a lot and get them done.
Thank you very much, Robinson. Mr. Dedrick, any last word?
Using the same word that COVID is the accelerator, I am reporting that the airports have accelerated. It's
open.
And we are operating in a COVID resilient set of protocols.
Yes.
Yes.
And we are capable of doing that going forward.
Very good, very good. And Mr. Marsh?
Our ports continue to be available and ready and continue to operate. And just to say that, you know, the environment is, I think, a contributor, Mr. Moran. Now is the right time, and we are ready.
Yes.
We are ready.
Yes. All right,
Yeah,
and
much better than we were 5 years ago.
yes, yes. It's one of the things that we ought not to waste a crisis.
Yeah.
And we have maximized on all of those and moving forward. Again, thank you very much for coming, those who participated and those who contributed, Mr. Morant, and we will act on your suggestion, and as soon as we are able to meet at the conference center, you'll be at the front of the line. We'll so inform. Thank you again, and have a good afternoon into evening, everybody. Take care now.
Thank you, and same to you.
Bye-bye. And just before you go, all right, I think we'll be putting up something on the screen for you to just be reminded of some of the things. All right, so take care and bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.